The world is waking up to heartbreaking news that Dolly Parton has died at the age of 80. And within hours, an extraordinary list of celebrities, musicians, politicians, and longtime friends began paying tribute to one of the most recognizable entertainers America has ever produced. Parton died Tuesday, August 25, 2026, in Nashville, Tennessee. Her team said she had been bravely facing a brief battle with cancer and died at Vanderbilt Ingram Cancer Center, surrounded by loved ones. Her family has said a small private service will be held for immediate family. And what makes this loss especially powerful is the sheer range of people mourning her. Country stars are mourning her. Hollywood is mourning her. Pop stars are mourning her. Political leaders are mourning her. Even artists from completely different generations and genres are talking about the same thing. Dolly Parton made people feel seen. Before we get into the tributes, if you appreciate thoughtful celebrity news and analysis, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because we will continue bringing you the stories behind the headlines. One of the most emotional reactions came from Taylor Swift. Swift said that a world without Dolly doesn't feel possible, real, or right, while remembering Parton as someone who combined grace with toughness and used her life to help others. And that is an important observation. Dolly wasn't simply successful. She became an example of how enormous fame could be used without losing humility. Swift specifically highlighted Parton's songwriting and her work providing books to children through the Imagination Library. Then there was Beyonce, who had a particularly meaningful connection to Dolly because the two artists collaborated on a new version of Jolene. Beyoncé described Dolly as a North Star and praised her art, heart, generosity, humor, and entrepreneurship. That word, entrepreneurship, matters. Dolly Parton didn't just become a music superstar. She built businesses, entertainment properties, and a philanthropic legacy that could survive long after her final performance. And Beyoncé clearly understood that. Kacey Musgraves delivered a much shorter but incredibly emotional reaction. She wrote that the world feels a lot less sparkly all of a sudden. Honestly, that may be one of the simplest ways to describe what Dolly's death feels like, because Dolly Parton brought an unmistakable brightness with her. She had the rhinestones, the huge personality, the humor, and the unmistakable voice. But behind all of that was an artist who understood pain, ambition, poverty, family, heartbreak, and perseverance. Reba McEntire also shared an emotional tribute. Reba thanked Dolly for everything she had done during her life and emphasized her enormous heart, her music, and her love. She also reflected on the first time she met Dolly and their final conversation, saying she would hold those memories with love. And coming from Reba, that tribute carries enormous weight. Dolly wasn't just another country singer to her generation. She was one of the people who helped define what country music could become. Then came Jane Fonda, Dolly's legendary co-star from 9 to 5. Fonda said she was devastated and reflected on how Dolly would remain present through memories, music, Dollywood, and the millions of books she helped put into children's hands. Fonda also emphasized Dolly's love for her LGBTQ+ fans and encouraged people to celebrate her spirit rather than simply mourn her. And then there is Lily Tomlin. For anyone who remembers 9 to 5, seeing Lily Tomlin and Dolly Parton together was more than entertainment. Their friendship became part of Hollywood history. Tomlin's response was extremely brief. No words. Sometimes it says more than a long statement ever could. Paul McCartney also remembered Dolly. McCartney had personally worked with Parton on her 2023 album Rockstar, where she recorded Let It Be. He remembered first meeting Dolly in Nashville and described her as bubbly and full of life. But perhaps the most significant part of McCartney's tribute was his recognition that Dolly's songwriting, singing, and philanthropy were extraordinary. He said he was honored that she recorded his song. And this is where Dolly's influence becomes difficult to measure. She could stand comfortably beside country legends, pop superstars, and rock icons because her talent crossed musical boundaries. Elton John was also shocked by the news. He described Dolly as a giant of an artist, unique, irreplaceable, and possessing a kind heart. That combination is exactly what separates Dolly Parton from many celebrities. Talent can make someone famous, but kindness can make someone beloved. Julia Roberts, Dolly's co-star in Steel Magnolias, remembered her as a magical and joyous person and said knowing her was a treasure. And that relationship is especially meaningful because Steel Magnolias introduced audiences to another side of Dolly, the actress, storyteller, and personality who could command a movie screen without abandoning the warmth that made audiences love her. Carol Burnett shared perhaps one of the most personal memories. She remembered working with Dolly on a television special and recalled that during Thanksgiving week, Dolly personally prepared individual turkey dinners for everyone. Burnett's conclusion was simple. That's who she was. And that may be one of the strongest tributes of all. Because when people remember a superstar, we often hear about awards, records, and accomplishments. But Dolly's friends keep talking about how she treated ordinary people. That tells us something. Dolly's greatest achievement may not have been a Grammy, a hit song, or a box office success. It may have been the number of people who genuinely believed she cared about them. Barack Obama also paid tribute, highlighting the extraordinary scope of Dolly's life. He pointed to her humble beginnings, her 11 Grammys, her business empire, her literacy work, and her role in supporting research that helped accelerate development of the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. Obama essentially described Dolly's life as something much bigger than entertainment. Former President Bill Clinton remembered Dolly as a songwriter and performer who told the stories of everyday Americans with honesty, humility, and heart. Hillary Clinton emphasized Dolly's philanthropy and the enormous reach of the Imagination Library. And Kamala Harris called Dolly a true American icon, pointing to her awards and her extraordinary literacy initiative. President Trump also responded to the news. He announced that the American flag would be lowered for 1 week in Dolly's honor and described her death as a true loss for millions of people. He also said there had never been anyone like her and never would be. That reaction is significant because Dolly's appeal was unusually broad. She could be celebrated by people with completely different political beliefs. That is increasingly rare in American public life. Dolly seemed to occupy a space where people could put politics aside and simply appreciate the person. And the tributes didn't stop there. Eminem shared a letter Dolly had previously written to him after his Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. He explained that although Dolly wasn't deeply familiar with rap music, she still took the time to reach out and encourage him. For Eminem, that personal gesture mattered, and it reveals another part of Dolly's personality. She didn't have to understand everything about someone's world to respect their talent. Mick Jagger remembered Dolly as a wonderful songwriter and singer who brought people together. Keith Urban said he was heartbroken and had no words. Patti LaBelle remembered her as a dear friend whose artistry, brilliance, and extraordinary life inspired countless people. Sabrina Carpenter called Dolly an angel who walked on earth and remembered her laughter, wisdom, and humor. Kelly Clarkson said Dolly had a remarkable ability to make people feel special, seen, and welcomed. And that particular description keeps appearing again and again. Seen, welcomed, loved. That may actually be Dolly Parton's greatest legacy. Not the wigs, not the rhinestones, not the records, not even the money. It was a feeling she gave people. The feeling that no matter where you came from, you could still dream. And perhaps no tribute demonstrates that better than Reese Witherspoon's. Witherspoon recalled that when she played June Carter Cash in Walk the Line, Dolly took her dinner and shared stories about June. According to Witherspoon, Dolly encouraged her and sent her notes of support throughout her career. That is the kind of mentorship that doesn't show up on an awards list, but it can change a person's life. Khloe Kardashian also remembered Dolly as a once-in-a-lifetime soul and said that simply having Dolly know her name was something she would always treasure. The Jacksons called Dolly a true trailblazer and remembered meeting her in England in 1977. Octavia Spencer called her a gift to the world. Coleman Domingo said Dolly taught people they could be anything and do anything, but to do it with kindness. And then there was Jack White. His entire tribute was just 2 words. Instant sainthood. Short, but strangely perfect. Because when you put all these tributes together, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Taylor Swift talked about Dolly's generosity. Beyonce talked about her entrepreneurship. Paul McCartney talked about her artistry. Jane Fonda talked about her humanity. Carol Burnett talked about her kindness. Barack Obama talked about her impact. Eminem talked about her personal encouragement. Reba talked about her heart. And countless others talked about how she made them feel. That is the real story behind Dolly Parton's death. She didn't simply leave behind a catalog of songs. She left behind a blueprint for becoming famous without becoming disconnected, a blueprint for building wealth without forgetting where you came from, a blueprint for being ambitious while remaining generous, and most importantly, a blueprint for treating people well. Dolly Parton was born into poverty in Tennessee and eventually became one of the most successful entertainers in the world. But she never allowed success to erase the little girl from the Smoky Mountains. Instead, she built her identity around that story. She turned hardship into songs. She turned songs into an empire, and she turned that empire into opportunities for other people. Her imagination library alone has reached millions of children with free books, making her philanthropic legacy almost as important as her musical one. And that is why I believe the tributes we are seeing today are so different from the usual celebrity memorials. People aren't only saying she was talented, they're saying she was kind. They're saying she helped me. They're saying she encouraged me. They're saying she made me feel seen. And when generations of people from completely different worlds say the same thing about one person, that tells you the person's impact was real. Dolly Parton's team has confirmed that she died after a brief battle with cancer, but the circumstances of her final illness should not overshadow the 6 decades of life that came before it. At 80, Dolly Parton leaves behind an extraordinary body of work, an enormous business legacy, generations of fans, and a philanthropic footprint that will continue touching children long after the headlines disappear. And perhaps the most fitting way to remember Dolly isn't to ask what the world has lost. It's to ask what the world still has because she was here. We still have Jolene. We still have 9 to 5. We still have I Will Always Love You. We still have Coat of Many Colors. We still have Dollywood. We still have millions of children opening books through the program she created. And we still have the example of a woman who came from a one-room cabin and somehow managed to make the entire world feel a little bigger. Dolly Parton is gone, but the songs are still here. The stories are still here. The laughter is still here. And judging from the extraordinary wave of tributes coming from Taylor Swift, Beyonce, Reba McEntire, Paul McCartney, Jane Fonda, Lily Tomlin, Elton John, Julia Roberts, Barack Obama, President Trump, Carol Burnett, Eminem, Kacey Musgraves, Kelly Clarkson, Patti LaBelle, Mick Jagger, Sabrina Carpenter, Reese Witherspoon, Octavia Spencer, Coleman Domingo, and so many others, the influence of Dolly Parton is nowhere close to disappearing. My personal take is simple. Dolly Parton's greatest achievement wasn't becoming a country music legend. It was becoming a human being that people from almost every corner of American culture could genuinely love. And that is an achievement very few celebrities will ever match. Rest in peace, Dolly Parton. The world may feel a little less sparkly today, but because of everything you gave us, it will never be completely dark.